You ever wake up knowing your day's about to go sideways? That was me. 6 in the morning, mug of coffee barely halfway to my lips, and I catch the glint of a clipboard out on my driveway. There she stood, Veronica Hartwell herself, president of the Willowbrook Estates HOA, dressed in tennis whites that probably cost more than my mortgage payment, scribbling away with that special look people reserve for stepping in something foul. Let me back up a second. I'm Marcus, 58, widower. I did 30 years fixing fighter jets, retired with a decent pension, a few scars, and a head full of stories. Used to have plans. My wife Sarah and we were going to travel, see Alaska, maybe even catch the northern lights. But cancer? Man, 8 months. That's all it took to turn the world upside down and make everything I'd built feel like it was made of sand. Then Mom started losing her memory, wandering, asking about Dad like he was just late getting home. He's been gone 15 years, but she'd still set his place at the table, you know? I couldn't leave her alone in Tucson. So I sold the house, packed up what was left of my life, and landed here. Willowbrook Estates, Phoenix's own slice of suburban purgatory, dressed up to look like paradise. They say the average home here's worth about $385,000. Mine? $290,000 if I'm lucky, and that's being generous. I guess you could say my place is the one spot in a row of perfect lawns and pastel stucco that still looks like somebody real lives there. And let me tell you, Veronica treats my house like it's an open wound on her perfect little neighborhood body. So there she was, at 6 a.m., writing up a fine and sticking it to my garage door with what turned out to be industrial superglue. Yeah, superglue. The kind that tears paint off in chunks when you try to pull the paper off. It left this ugly, sticky patch like a bad tattoo. The charge? Unsightly automotive waste storage. 12 tires stacked beside the garage. Not just any tires, either. These were Dad's. Vintage racing slicks, NASCAR rubber, a couple of rare Michelins from back when rally drivers were still a little crazy. What really got me wasn't just the fine. It was the way she jogged past right after, not even breaking stride, just looked over her shoulder, flashed that entitled smirk, and kept going like she'd just banished a stray dog from her kingdom. You know that smell right before the sun really bakes the desert? A little creosote, a hint of dust, and just the tiniest whiff of fresh injustice. That was my morning. She had no idea what she'd just started. Now, most folks would see a pile of old tires and maybe think I was running some back alley auto shop. But collectors? They'd tell you I was sitting on about 15 grand worth of history. Each tire had a story. Dad's story, really. 40 years running Southwest Tire and Auto, back when a handshake still meant something. He'd save one from every race he worked. Told me they were his rubber trophies. I was planning to sell them, to pay for Mom's memory care when the time came. But to Veronica, all she saw was a threat to her idea of community standards. She once fined Miguel Ramirez $300 for parking his landscaping truck in his own driveway. Meanwhile, her friend Janet parks a 30-foot RV out front for months, and nobody bats an eye. Dorothy Chin, widow, 78, got hit with a $200 citation because she put 4 garden gnomes in her yard. 4. Meanwhile, the neighbor across from Veronica's house had enough pool equipment and lawn junk piled up to build a second garage, but because he drove a BMW, not a word. I stood there, peeling the last of the glue off my hands, and I felt it. That cold, methodical calm that settles over you when you realize you're not just fighting for yourself anymore. This wasn't about tires. It was about Dad, about everything he built and everything these people wanted to erase with a stroke of a pen. I'll be honest, I almost paid the fine just to avoid the hassle. But something inside me said, not this time. Not her. Not for him. So I did what any decent Air Force mechanic would do. I started looking for the weak spots. 2 days later, I was sitting on Veronica's fancy couch, right in the heart of her $600,000 living room, staring at marble floors so shiny you could check your teeth in them. The monthly HOA board meeting. She didn't even look up when she called my name. Mr. Torres, your appeal regarding the automotive waste violation. Said it like she was announcing the weather. I'd come prepared. 3 appraisals from legit collectors. Photos showing how the tires were stacked, neat, off the ground. No chance of attracting pests. Documentation about their value. She cut me off after 2 sentences. Sentimental value doesn't override community standards, Mr. Torres. Her perfume hit me like a wall, sharp and chemical, barely masking the contempt underneath. The board voted without discussion. 3 hands went up. Fine upheld. Oh, and an extra $50 administrative fee for appealing. Frivolous, she called it. Like I was some brat wasting her precious time. I just smiled, thanked her for clarifying, and made a big show of tucking the paperwork into my folder. She thought I was beaten. Most people probably would have been. But she had no idea who she was dealing with. The next morning, I was out at sunrise with my camera. 30 years in maintenance trains you to notice details, the little things most folks ignore. I started documenting every violation I could find in Willowbrook. Took pictures, wrote down addresses, tracked dates. What I found would have made a federal agent's head spin. Janet Morrison, Veronica's tennis partner, had a boat trailer in her driveway for a year and a half. No citations. The Hendersons? Pool equipment, busted lawnmowers, and something that looked suspiciously like an airplane engine scattered across their yard. No letters, no fines. But Miguel? First day his truck was parked out front, he got a ticket. Patterns. Biases. It was so blatant it was almost funny. If it hadn't been screwing over good people. Then I got curious about those administrative fees. Started digging through Arizona state law. You ever want to kill an afternoon, read up on HOA statutes. It's like somebody put a bunch of lawyers in a room and told them to see who could make the most confusing document possible. But I found it clear as day. HOAs have to enforce rules uniformly. Selective enforcement? Violates the Fair Housing Act. Federal offense. Real teeth. So, I filed a formal complaint. Not because I thought the government would swoop in like superheroes, but because I knew paper trails matter. You gotta build your case like you're investigating a crash. Every step, every scrap of evidence, just in case the engine flames out and someone tries to blame you. Pretty soon, word got around. Neighbors started showing up at my door. Dorothy brought cookies and a stack of old violation letters, most with Veronica's handwriting at the bottom. Miguel shared his own photos and notes. We started swapping stories, piecing together a puzzle that got uglier with every corner. Then Dorothy let slip something about the beautification fund. The HOA had been collecting extra fees, $47,000 over 3 years, supposedly for neighborhood improvements. But all we'd seen was a couple of new bushes and a mailbox that got replaced every 6 months. So I got creative. Filed a public records request for all the HOA's financials. Took about a week, but when I got those documents in the mail, I thought my blood pressure was going to blow the roof off my house. Every cent of that fund went to Hartwell Landscape Solutions, Veronica's husband. No bid contracts for community enhancements that boiled down to trimming 3 bushes and replacing a mailbox. The same mailbox, 4 times. Different invoice numbers every time. I didn't confront her. Didn't march over and demand answers. No, I just made copies. Sent them to every homeowner in Willowbrook, along with a note breaking down exactly where their money was going. I might have thrown in a joke or two about the world's most expensive mailboxes. By noon the next day, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. 17 people wanted to join a class action lawsuit. 3 offered to help dig deeper. Suddenly, I wasn't just the guy with the tire garden. I was the accidental ringleader of Willowbrook's first ever rebellion. You ever feel that moment when the tide turns? When people stop being scared and start getting mad. It's electric. Feels like the moment right before a thunderstorm when the hair on your arm stands up. 3 days after that mail drop, I got a letter. Certified. Heavy envelope. The kind that makes your gut twist before you even open it. From Redwell and Associates, Veronica's law firm. Notice of intent to place liens. My fine had jumped to $750. If I didn't pay in 30 days, they'd start foreclosure proceedings on my house for 12 tires worth more than her Mercedes payment. You ever read one of those letters? The legalese is designed to make you feel like you're drowning. Daily penalties, attorney fees, collection costs. It's financial terrorism, plain and simple. At the bottom, Veronica's handwriting. This matter could be resolved quickly with reasonable cooperation, which is code for bow down, peasant. But see, Veronica made a mistake. She thought she was playing chess with somebody who didn't know how to move pieces. She didn't know about the 1987 HOA covenant, the original one, tucked away in the county archives, before a dozen self-important board presidents added amendments nobody actually voted on. Buried in Section 15.4, decorative planters and garden features are encouraged to enhance community aesthetics. Encouraged, not regulated. So you know what I did? I took every single one of those tires and turned them into planters. Painted them bright colors, filled them with native desert marigolds, barrel cacti, and trailing lantana. I even made little wooden signs with plant names on them. Set them out in neat rows along my driveway. Looked like something out of a desert botanical garden. Neighbors started stopping by, asking questions, laughing, taking photos. Even Dorothy shuffled over with her watering can and asked if she could help. Before I knew it, we had a little rebellion garden going. Miguel installed a drip irrigation system. Blake, the teenager next door, helped set up solar lights so everything glowed at night. All the while, Veronica's white Mercedes circled my block like a hungry shark. She'd park across the street, snapping photos, probably dialing every city department she could find in the phone book. But there was nothing in the rules against planters. In fact, they encouraged them. And you know what? The local news caught wind. Channel 12 showed up with a camera crew. Did a segment about the creative homeowner turning HOA harassment into eco-friendly art. I stood next to my tire planters, holding her latest violation notice, and explained how her own rules protected what I'd done. The reporter loved it, called it the Tire Garden Rebellion. The segment blew up online. Suddenly, neighbors in other subdivisions were asking how they could start their own. But if you think Veronica backed down after all that, not even close. The next week, I started getting violations daily. Monday, unlicensed landscaping modifications. $200 fine. Tuesday, excessive garden decorations. Another $150. Wednesday, noise during maintenance. $100. Thursday, potential rodent habitat. $175. It was a joke. The woman was throwing every rule in the book at me, hoping something would stick. Friday morning, I heard a knock at the door. Guy in a county uniform, clipboard shaking in his hand. Bradley Henderson, Code Enforcement. Anonymous complaint about junkyard conditions and environmental hazards. I almost laughed. Environmental hazards? You mean these tire planters? Pulled out my environmental safety report, clean as a whistle. The poor kid looked like he wanted to crawl under a rock. No violations found, sir. He practically ran back to his truck. Turns out, Bradley was Harold's son, one of Veronica's board members. Dorothy found out. She called in a favor to get him assigned, she whispered, sliding a folder thick as a dictionary across my table. Inside, contracts for community health assessments, paid out to Harold's consulting business. 15 grand for 2 neighborhood walkarounds. It wasn't just petty. It was organized crime, suburban style. But while Veronica was lobbing fines and threatening foreclosure, something amazing was happening out front. More tire gardens started popping up. Dorothy made an herb garden. Miguel built a succulent wall. Blake's science project turned into a butterfly sanctuary. The block transformed. Property values actually started to rise. Meanwhile, I was building my case. Public records, contracts, vendor payments. Everything lined up. And every night, our little group would meet, Dorothy, Miguel, Blake, and a few others. We'd strategize, share stories, plan the next move. And all the while, Veronica was unraveling, driving by, making calls, trying to hold onto her little kingdom. But the thing about bullies? They never see the end coming. There's a kind of satisfaction in watching a bully start to sweat. You know that moment, the facade cracks, the voice gets shriller, and suddenly the crowd's not so scared anymore. That's where Veronica was heading, and I could feel it in the air. But first, she tried to escalate. She started sending threats not just to me, but to the neighbors who'd helped me with the gardens. Dorothy got a citation for illegal herbal displays. Miguel was told his drip irrigation system was an unauthorized water feature. Even Blake's mom got a warning letter, something about adolescent loitering, like her kid's science project was the gateway to anarchy. You ever see people get tired of being afraid? It's something. I watched as more neighbors stopped avoiding eye contact and started asking questions. How much are we paying for landscaping? Why does Janet get a pass on her RV, but the rest of us can't leave a lawn chair out? What's this beautification fund, anyway? It built up slow, like thunderheads over the mountains. You know something's coming, even if you can't quite see it yet. Meanwhile, Dorothy was doing what Dorothy does, digging. Turns out, when you spend 40 years running municipal records, you know where the bodies are buried. She pulled old meeting minutes, original covenants, every amendment, and bylaw going back to the Reagan era. That's when we found the bombshell. The original Willowbrook Estates Covenant, 1987, page 23, section 4.7. It's spelled out in black and white. No assessment or fine imposed by the Homeowners Association may exceed the actual documented cost of remediation or repair required to bring a property into compliance. Not arbitrary. Not whatever Veronica dreamed up over morning coffee. Actual cost with documentation. I remember Dorothy peering over her glasses at me, voice all gravelly and low. Marcus, do you realize what this means? I did. It meant every fine she'd levied, every administrative fee, was a sham. Fraud, plain and simple. My $750 tire fine? Actual cost to haul them off would have been $89 tops. Miguel's truck? Nothing. No remediation required. Dorothy's gnomes? Maybe $20 to move them for an hour. But that wasn't the end of it. In a manila folder labeled Board Transition 2018, Dorothy found notes from the last HOA president, Robertson. His handwriting was a little shaky, but you could still read the frustration between the lines. He'd questioned those same landscaping contracts, the administrative fees. Then, suddenly, he'd moved out for family reasons. We tracked down his number. I called him that night. My hands actually shook like I was about to defuse a bomb. Robert, it's Marcus Torres from Willowbrook. I'm the guy with the tire gardens driving Veronica Hartwell up a wall. He laughed, this tired, bitter sound. You're that guy. Good for you, man. Someone needs to torch her little empire. I asked him why he really left. He was quiet a long time, then finally said, I found evidence of fraud. Contracts with board members' companies, kickbacks, illegal fines. When I pushed, she made my life hell. My girls were starting college. I couldn't risk losing the house. But Robert kept records. All of them. Scans, emails, receipts, copies of every fine and threat. I'll send it all to you. Just promise me you'll finish what I couldn't. When the package showed up 2 days later, it felt like Christmas morning for whistleblowers. My kitchen table turned into a war room. Papers spread out, whiteboards scribbled with flowcharts, connections mapped out with highlighters and post-its. Dorothy handled the legal research. Miguel dug into city codes. Blake, God bless the youth, handled the digital front, organizing a Facebook group, a Google Drive for evidence, the works. We weren't just fighting back. We were building a case. Here's what we found. Over 5 years, Veronica and her inner circle had collected nearly $250,000 in illegal fines. Landscaping contracts all went to Hartwell Landscape Solutions or Harold's Consulting Business. Shell companies, falsified invoices, checks written out for community health assessments that were basically a couple of laps around the block. Janet's administrative support, charged at $200 an hour. It was all there in black and white. And the original covenant never legally amended, because any change required written approval from 67% of homeowners. Every change Veronica had made in 6 years? Null and void. Now, I'd like to tell you we went right to the police, but experience told me to build the case first. Slow and steady. Paper trails. Witnesses. We had Dorothy's 40 years of experience, Robert's records, and neighbors ready to testify. I reached out to Sarah Martinez, a friend of mine from the old days, now a forensic accountant. She took one look at the numbers and grinned. Marcus, this is a gold mine. They've been stealing in broad daylight. While we gathered evidence, Veronica went nuclear. She ramped up the citations, sometimes 3 in a single day. She even started parking across from my house with her phone out, snapping photos like she was collecting evidence for a murder trial. You'd think at some point she'd realize she was losing, but people like her, they double down. Always. Then one morning, I stepped outside and nearly dropped my coffee. My entire gardens obliterated. Every marigold yanked out, cacti ripped from the dirt, irrigation slashed to bits. Looked like a tornado hit, or maybe just a really angry dictator. Lucky for me, I'd installed a security system. Infrared cameras, motion sensors, the whole 9 yards. The footage was crystal clear. There she was, Veronica Hartwell herself, in her tennis whites, ripping up plants and cursing at the top of her lungs. If it hadn't been so sad, it would have been funny. I called the police, filed a report for vandalism. When Detective Rodriguez came by to review the footage, she watched it twice, shook her head, and said, "This isn't just vandalism. This is criminal harassment. And with all this paperwork you've gathered, you might want to call the feds." That night, Dorothy and I sat out on the curb with mugs of tea, watching the sun set over the mess in my yard. She squeezed my hand. "We're close, Marcus." She's panicking. They always make mistakes when they panic. She wasn't wrong. The neighborhood was buzzing. People who'd never spoken up were knocking on my door, sharing stories, asking what they could do. Blake's Facebook group grew to almost half the subdivision overnight. Folks brought over plants, tools, even a few six-packs to share while we rebuilt the gardens bigger and better. But that wasn't even the best part. The local news came back for a follow-up, this time with a live crew. They filmed the neighborhood planting party. Kids with dirt on their faces, Dorothy handing out watering cans like medals of honor. They interviewed me standing in front of my rebuilt garden, marigolds blazing orange under the afternoon sun. You could see Veronica in the background, standing on her porch, fists clenched at her sides. And then it happened. Channel 12 ran the story that night, Willowbrook Gardens. How a community fought back against HOA abuse. The footage went viral. Suddenly, our story was everywhere. Other neighborhoods reached out. Folks in Tucson, Mesa, even as far as Flagstaff. They wanted to know how we did it, how we took on the HOA and won. But inside Willowbrook, the wheels were really coming off. Veronica started losing her allies. Janet stopped returning calls. Harold Consulting business folded after the city started sniffing around. Even the Hendersons suddenly put their house up for sale. Meanwhile, our group, well, it was more than a group now. It was a movement. 47 households. Weekly meetings. We had a lawyer, a forensic accountant, 3 ex-cops, and a retired judge from down the block who offered advice pro bono. We called for a special election, just like the original covenant allowed. 67% of homeowners signed the petition. County officials scheduled the vote. Media started calling it the Willowbrook Revolution. I never set out to lead a revolution. I just wanted to keep my dad's tires out of the landfill. But sometimes you don't pick the fight. It picks you. The day before the election, Veronica tried one last move. She showed up at my door with Harold and Janet in tow, looking for all the world like a trio headed to a firing squad. She offered to settle all my fines for $200, plus a favorable mention in her real estate newsletter if I just get rid of the gardens and drop everything. I looked at her, really looked, and realized I wasn't scared anymore. Not of her, not of lawsuits, not of what came next. "Mrs. Hartwell," I said, just loud enough for the folks working in their yards to hear, "I wouldn't take $1 million to tear out those gardens. They mean more than you'll ever understand." Something changed in her eyes. The smile vanished. For the first time, she looked afraid. "You've made your choice, Mr. Torres," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "I hope you can live with the consequences." "I already am," I told her. That night, I barely slept. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of wind in the cacti outside my window. I thought about Sarah, about my dad, about how quickly life can turn sideways, and how sometimes, when you're knocked flat, the only thing to do is stand back up, fists clenched, and fight for the patch of earth that's yours. Tomorrow was going to be a big day. The morning of the special election felt like the whole neighborhood was holding its breath. I stepped outside at sunrise, air still cool, dew clinging to the gravel, and saw little clusters of people milling around, nervous and excited. Dorothy was already out front, fussing with her hat, hands shaking just a little, but her eyes steady as steel. "You ready for this, Marcus?" she asked. I nodded, but truth is, my stomach was in knots. I could fix a jet with a blindfold, but I'd never taken down a suburban tyrant before breakfast. Word had spread, fast. By 6:45, folks were pulling up lawn chairs outside the community center. Neighbors I'd never even met waving and calling out encouragement. Local news vans circled, setting up tripods. There was a buzz in the air, electric and alive, like the minutes before a summer monsoon. I could feel it down to my bones. Inside, it was standing room only. 200, maybe 250 people crammed into a space built for 50. Blake had organized a live stream, setting up phones and laptops at every angle. You could see Veronica at the front table, looking smaller. Shoulders slumped, hair flat, eyes darting around like a caged animal. Not so regal, without her entourage. The county official, Janet Martinez, an actual grown-up, thank God, called the meeting to order. This special election has been petitioned by more than 67% of Willowbrook residents. Tonight, you will vote to remove or retain the current HOA board and elect new officers. All residents are eligible to participate. We'll begin with statements from both sides. Veronica stood, voice brittle, but still trying to sound commanding. She talked about standards and property values and the slippery slope of letting rules slide. You could feel the crowd shift, shoulders tensing, eyes narrowing. People had heard this tune before. Then it was my turn. I didn't plan to give a speech. I just walked to the front, held up a copy of the original covenant, and let my hands shake a little so folks could see I was just a regular guy. 6 months ago, I got a $500 fine for keeping 12 tires that belonged to my dad. Those tires weren't junk. They were history, a legacy. I thought it was just me, just one guy being hassled. But it turns out it was a lot of us. It was Dorothy and Miguel and the Johnsons and anybody else who didn't fit Veronica's idea of exclusive community living. I spent my life keeping fighter jets from falling out of the sky. I know something about systems. And when a system is broken, you fix it. You don't just blame the people who get hurt. You fix the cause. People started nodding. Somebody clapped. I showed the documents, Robert's evidence, the financials, the old rules. We found proof, real proof, of illegal fines, fraudulent contracts, shell companies, discrimination. Over $250,000 taken from our neighbors. Money that should have gone to schools, to families, to community gardens, not to some slush fund for a handful of people who never had to answer to anyone. I looked right at Veronica. She tried to hold my gaze, but she blinked first. We're not here to fight for marigolds or tires or gnomes. We're here to take our neighborhood back, to prove that when people stand up for each other, nobody can run them over, not even with a white Mercedes. That broke the tension. There was a ripple of laughter, applause. I stepped down, heart thudding in my chest, not sure if I'd said enough or too much. Janet Martinez took over. All in favor of removing the current board, please raise your hand. Hands shot up. A wave. Nearly unanimous. Even Harold and Janet, Veronica's old allies, kept their arms folded in their laps, eyes glued to the floor. Janet Martinez counted, then announced, the motion carries. The current HOA board is removed effective immediately. There was this stunned silence. Then the whole room burst into applause, whoops, cheers. I actually felt my knees go weak. Dorothy grabbed my arm, grinning from ear to ear. But we weren't done. Next, Janet said, nominations for president. Dorothy stood, steady as you please. I'd like to nominate myself. My platform is simple: transparency, fairness, and real community gardens for anyone who wants one. Someone yelled, seconded, and the room erupted again. The vote was a landslide: Dorothy for president, Miguel for vice, Blake's mom for secretary. For the first time in years, the people in charge were the ones who'd actually listened, who'd been on the receiving end of Veronica's fines. As folks filed out, I caught a glimpse of Veronica. She was alone now, no supporters, no smile, nothing but the sound of her heels echoing on the tile. She tried to leave quietly, but the news crews followed her out, cameras flashing, microphones thrust in her face. She didn't answer a word. The next day, federal agents arrived at her house. The case we'd built, Dorothy's paperwork, Robert's files, the video of her tearing up my garden, all the financials, had reached the right hands. They led her away in handcuffs. There wasn't any gloating, no one cheering in the street. Just neighbors watching from their windows, some shaking their heads, some just relieved it was over. A few days later, Dorothy hosted the first open HOA meeting on her lawn. No marble floors, no security, just folding chairs and pitchers of lemonade. Kids played in the street. Miguel grilled hot dogs. The air was lighter, like a storm had finally broken and the sun was out again. We started fixing things. Issued refunds for illegal fines, posted every contract and expenditure online, held real votes for every decision. Folks who'd never spoken at meetings started coming out, asking questions, offering ideas. Blake led a campaign to plant community gardens all over Willowbrook, and soon every street had tire planters bursting with marigolds, succulents, even cherry tomatoes. Property values didn't crash. In fact, they went up. Turns out, people like living somewhere that feels alive, where you know your neighbors and nobody's out to get you over a missing blade of grass. The story spread. Channel 12 ran a follow-up about the tire garden revolution. Neighborhoods across Phoenix started reaching out. Even Arizona State wanted to study what we'd done, how one small rebellion sparked a movement. But the biggest change was quieter. Neighbors who used to just nod across the driveway started stopping to talk. Folks helped Dorothy with her groceries. Miguel's kids walked Blake's dog when he got busy. We started sharing tools, recipes, babysitters. Someone organized a block party. Then another. It wasn't perfect, never is, but the fear was gone. In its place, something like pride. I kept the gardens going. Every morning, I'd water the plants and remember Sarah, remember my dad. The marigolds grew bigger, brighter. Kids would point at the flowers and ask about the old racing tires, and I'd tell them stories about the track, about my dad's shop, about how sometimes the best thing you can do is stand up for what matters, even when it's messy, even when you're scared. A few months later, Dorothy announced a new scholarship fund. the Willowbrook Environmental Justice Award, using money recovered from the illegal fines. It went to kids working on community projects, gardens, environmental cleanup. Blake was the first recipient, and let me tell you, seeing that kid grinning with his certificate was worth every sleepless night. It wasn't all sunshine. There were court dates, paperwork, hard conversations. Veronica's husband lost his landscaping contracts. Janet had to answer questions about kickbacks. Some people moved away, tired of the drama. But most stayed. They stuck it out. Because in the end, Willowbrook wasn't just a place to live. It was home. And you fight for home. The last thing I'll say, if you're listening out there wondering what to do when someone in power tries to steamroll you, don't go it alone. Find your people. Document everything. Be patient, be methodical, and don't be afraid to get a little dirt under your nails. Gardens grow from the messiest soil. I never meant to start a revolution. I just wanted to protect a few old tires and a lifetime of memories. Turns out, sometimes that's enough. 6 months later, life in Willowbrook was almost unrecognizable, in the best possible way. You could walk down the street and actually hear kids laughing, dogs barking, people chatting by their mailboxes. The old tension, that sticky fear that used to follow you from driveway to front door, it was just gone, replaced by something looser, lighter. Dorothy was still president, and true to her word, every meeting was open air, no closed doors, no power plays. Every expense posted online. Every contract up for public bid. It got boring in the best way. Sometimes you need a little boredom after years of drama. The tire gardens multiplied. Not just on my block, but up and down the whole neighborhood. Every street got its own little patch of color. Marigolds, lantana, prickly pear, you name it. Kids would paint old tires during the weekend. Neighbors would swap cuttings. And I got to be the unofficial garden coach, which I never would have guessed 6 months before. Funny thing, property values rose even faster. Realtors started bragging about the most creative landscaping in Phoenix. One day, a guy from the city called to ask how we'd cut our water usage by 30%. I told him it's all about native plants and folks actually giving a damn about where they live. The scholarship Dorothy started grew, too. First, it sent Blake to a summer camp for environmental science. Next year, 3 more kids. By year 3, we'd given out 10 grants. Most of them went to kids who'd spent weekends digging, watering, fixing busted irrigation, and running a lemonade stand that somehow raised $4,000 for the food bank. Veronica, last I heard, was serving 18 months in a federal prison for fraud and discrimination. Her husband's landscaping business vanished overnight. Janet and Harold did their community service, and, to everyone's shock, stuck around, helping Dorothy run transparency audits, volunteering for garden projects. Some people need a little public shaming before they get their act together, I guess. It's weird. Sometimes I catch myself looking for trouble, expecting another letter taped to the door or a Mercedes circling the block. Old habits die hard. But mostly what I find is someone waving or asking how the barrel cacti are doing, or dropping off homemade cookies. Sarah would have loved to hear now. I think about her every morning when I water the gardens, watching the sunlight creep over the rooftops, listening to the desert birds. Some days, I swear I can hear her laugh, or my dad's old voice, telling me to double-check the drip lines and quit slacking off. A couple months back, we held the first Willowbrook Desert Bloom Festival. 5,000 people showed up, neighbors, folks from other towns, even the mayor. Families picnicked on the green, kids played tag between tire planters, and there was this sense of belonging. Like all the old wounds had finally healed. Dorothy, she stood up at the festival and said, "We proved you don't need to be afraid of the people in charge. You just have to outlast them. Gardens grow slow. Justice grows slower. But if you stick with it, they both come up strong." Blake's headed to college next fall, full scholarship. Miguel started a side business, consulting for other neighborhoods, helping them fight back, build gardens, take on their own little dictators. Even Harold and Janet seem proud of the new Willowbrook. Every week, I get emails from people in other states. Our HOA is a nightmare. What did you do? How do I fight back without getting buried? I always tell them the same thing. Start with the documents. Read the rules. Build your case. Find your allies. And when you can, turn every attack into something creative. People remember beauty long after they forget who threw the first punch. Last week, Dorothy and I drove up to Scottsdale to help a group facing their own HOA nonsense, this time about vegetable gardens. We loaded up the truck with tire planters, copies of the old covenants, and enough coffee to fuel a small army. It's become a running joke, Marcus and Dorothy's traveling HOA circus. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that story spread. And once folks see it can be done, once they see you don't have to take it lying down, something shifts. The fear goes out of the room. Hope comes in. I still keep my dad's tires out front. The original 12, cleaned up, painted, overflowing with marigolds and cacti. I tell every kid who asks, those tires beat the HOA president, saved our neighborhood, and helped put crooks in jail. But mostly, they remind me that you don't throw away what matters just because somebody else thinks it looks messy. If you're listening to this and you're fighting your own fight, maybe it's an HOA, maybe it's something bigger, just know you're not alone. Sometimes you win. Sometimes you lose. Most times, it just takes longer than you want and costs more than you thought it would. But if you stick with it, if you find your people and refuse to back down, even the worst bullies eventually trip over their own arrogance. You want to know the secret? Document everything. Laugh when you can. Garden in the cracks. And when all else fails, plant something beautiful right where they said you couldn't. The desert marigolds are still blooming. And so am I.